My name is Eleanor. To the few who still remember the woman I was, I am fondly called Nana or Grandma Ellie. But in this vast, echoing house, those names are rarely spoken, and when they are, they feel like a relic from someone else's life. Today, I sit on the cold, marble steps of this mansion, a palace built on the bones of my sacrifices. The sun casts long, accusing shadows across the foyer, illuminating dust motes that dance like forgotten memories. This house, 1143, Willow Lane, is where the most beautiful and the most painful years of my life have converged and crystallized into a single, unending ache. Today, I will unburden my heart. I will speak into this silent hall the story of how my own son, my flesh and blood, my Jason, became a stranger to me, a curator of my loneliness. The chill of the marble seeps through my thin dress, a sensation so familiar it feels like a part of my skin. I run a hand, gnarled with age and work, over the smooth, veined stone. It was on these very steps, 40 years ago, in a small, clapboard house smelling of baking bread and damp earth, that I taught Jason to take his first steps. He was a sturdy, bright-eyed boy with a laugh that could disarm the sun itself. I can still feel the ghost of his tiny, trusting hand in mine, the weight of his body as he wobbled, the triumphant squeal when he tumbled into my waiting arms at the bottom. George, my late husband, would whoop with joy, his camera flashing, preserving that moment of pure, unadulterated joy. We were not rich in money, but we were millionaires in love. Our home was a symphony of life, squeaky floorboards, the constant hum of the old refrigerator, the scent of George's pipe tobacco mingling with my baking. It was a world of texture and warmth, a world we built with our own hands and hearts. George was a mechanic, his hands permanently etched with grease, his smile as reliable as the sunrise. I was a librarian, a keeper of stories, my soul nourished by the whispers of A. Thousand lives lived between book covers. Our dreams were simple, woven into the fabric of our daily lives. We dreamed of a good life for our son, a life where his horizons would be wider than ours. We never wanted palaces. We wanted him to have choices we never did. The decision to put him through college and business school was not a difficult one. It was an article of faith. It meant sacrifice, but it was a sacrifice offered with joy, with a sense of purpose that made every privation feel holy. We sold the small plot of land George's father had left him, a beautiful, sun-drenched piece of earth at the edge of town where George dreamed of retiring, of planting an apple orchard and a vegetable garden. I remember the day we signed the papers. George's hand trembled slightly, but his voice was firm. Land can be bought again, Ellie. Our son's future can't wait. I took on extra shifts at the library, my world shrinking to the dim, dusty aisles and the relentless stamping of due dates. My fingers, which once spent their free time stitching quilts and kneading dough, grew stiff and sore. I would come home long after dark, my body weary, to find George at the kitchen table, mending his work clothes by hand to save the cost of a tailor, a pot of soup keeping warm on the stove for me. We wore our clothes until they were thin as parchment, patched and repatched with a love that was visible in every stitch. We ate simple, hearty meals, and any extra penny was funneled into the Jason Fund, a tin box that held our hopes. We never made him feel the weight of it. When he needed new textbooks, the money appeared. When his friends were going on a trip, we found a way for him to go. We wanted him to fly unencumbered by the shadow of our struggle. Our dream was that when he became successful, he would be our support in our twilight years, not just financial, for we were frugal and proud, but emotional, the final, warm circle of a family's life. We imagined Sundays filled with H. We imagined Sundays filled with his family and ours, holidays where the house would once again ring with laughter, a comfortable chair for George by the fire, and for me, the simple joy of having my son nearby, a successful, happy man. We were investing in a shared future, one built on the foundation of the past we had given him. And he did become successful. Oh, he surpassed every dream we ever dared to have. Jason, our boy, became a titan in a glass and steel world. He was sharp, ambitious, and driven in a way that was both awe-inspiring and, if I'm honest, slightly frightening. The gentle boy who loved frogs and model airplanes was replaced by a man in a bespoke suit, his language peppered with terms like leveraged buyout and quarterly projections. We didn't always understand him, but our pride was a physical force, a constant, warm glow in our chests. When George passed, taken too soon by a heart that had simply worked too hard for too long, the world lost its color for me. Jason was my anchor. He handled the funeral arrangements with a brisk efficiency that left no room for my grief to spill over. "I've got it, Mom," he'd say, his phone always at his ear. "Don't you worry." In my fog of loss, I mistook his efficiency for strength, his distance for a manly containment of emotion. It was a year after George's passing that Jason announced he was buying a new house. A proper home, he called it. For us. The us filled the hollow space inside me. When he brought me to see 1143 Willow Lane for the first time, my breath caught in my throat. It wasn't a house, it was a statement. A monument of glass, steel, and pale stone, it stood behind a gated drive, imposing and flawless. The scale of it was dizzying. Soaring double-height ceilings, windows that were vast, flawless sheets of glass offering curated views of manicured gardens, a kitchen that looked like it belonged in a magazine, all gleaming surfaces and mysterious, built-in appliances. The initial period in the mansion was a time of quiet adjustment. I told myself it was just a new chapter, that we were all finding our footing. Jason was busy with his demanding career, and Sarah, my daughter-in-law, was occupied with her social commitments and the management of the house. I saw little of them, and our interactions were polite, if distant. I filled my days by trying to make myself useful, but there was a constant, unspoken tension. My ways were not their ways. The first real cruelty, the one that carved the initial, deepest wound, was inflicted upon my room. It began subtly, with comments that felt like tiny shards of glass. Sarah would run a finger over the mantelpiece in my bedroom, the largest guest room with a lovely eastern exposure, and remark, "It's so difficult to keep these older pieces dust-free, isn't it?" My collection of porcelain thimbles from every state George and I had visited was charming but dusty. The framed cross-stitch I'd made for Jason's graduation, with its bright, hopeful letters spelling "Follow Your Dreams," was quaint but out of place with a color palette. I tried to adapt. I rearranged my things, I bought a more modern-looking vase, I kept my door closed. I thought if I could just make my corner of their world neater, more invisible, I would be allowed to stay in it. Then, one evening over a dinner so silent you could hear the precise scrape of sterling silver on bone china, Jason cleared his throat. The sound was like a stone dropping into a still pond. "Mom, we need to talk about your room," he began, his eyes fixed on his plate of seared scallops arranged like architectural miniatures. My heart gave a little lurch. "What about it? Dear, we've had the interior designer in for the final walkthrough," he continued, still not looking at me. "She feels that the overall aesthetic of your room clashes with the house's modern decor. It's creating a visual dissonance." I blinked, my fork hovering in midair. Dissonance. The word felt clinical, cold. "Yes," Sarah chimed in, her voice as smooth and cool as the polished granite countertop that separated the kitchen from the living area. "The antiques, the dark wood, the floral patterns, and, well, the personal effects. They disrupt the minimalist flow. This is an open-concept home, Eleanor. Every piece, every room, needs to contribute to the whole. Cohesion is key." I looked from her composed face to my son's, waiting for him to laugh, to tell me it was a silly notion from a pretentious designer, and of course my room was my own. But he just shifted in his seat, his jaw tight. "But that's my things," I said, my voice sounding feeble and old. "Your father's picture is on that nightstand. That quilt was on our bed for 40 years. We're not throwing anything away, Mom," Jason said, a note of strained patience creeping into his voice, the tone he used when explaining a complex business concept to a simpleton. "We're just relocating you." The room at the end of the hall, the one we currently use for storage. We're having it cleared out and painted. It will be perfectly comfortable and quieter for you, away from the main living areas. Perfectly comfortable. The phrase would become a curse in my mind. That room was a glorified storage closet, a windowless box tucked away next to the constant, low hum of the water heater and the furnace. It was the smallest and darkest room in the house, a space not meant for a person, but for forgotten holiday decorations, outdated electronics, and surplus supplies. It was a space designed to be unseen. The move was swift and surgical. It felt like an eviction. Jason arranged for me to have a full-day medical checkup, a comprehensive wellness assessment he insisted was for my own good. I was poked and prodded, my body a subject of analysis. When I returned, weary and disoriented, the transformation was complete. My old room stood open. The walls, once a soft, warm cream I had chosen, were now a stark, sterile gray. My furniture was gone. The mahogany dresser, the four-poster bed, George's armchair, all vanished. In their place was a sleek, low-profile platform bed with a gray upholstered headboard and a single, abstract painting on the wall in shades of silver and black. It was a hotel room. A very expensive, very impersonal hotel room. It had been purged of me. With a sinking heart, I walked down the long, wide hallway to the very end. The door to the storage room was open. Inside, my life had been crammed. My beautiful dresser was shoved against one wall, a long, white scratch marring its polished surface where it had been dragged against a doorframe. My boxes were haphazardly stacked in a corner, one labeled photo albums, partially crushed. My bed, the double bed that wouldn't fit, had been replaced by a narrow, single bed like something from a dormitory. And George's armchair, too bulky for the space, was angled awkwardly, one armrest pressed against the cold, blank wall. This was my new room, my world. It smelled faintly of bleach, new paint, and the faint, metallic tang of the utility room. There was no window to let in the sun, to tell me the time of day or the weather. The only light came from a cold, harsh, artificial LED panel recessed into the ceiling. My memories, George's pictures, everything that defined my 78 years on this earth was pushed into a corner of this 10 by 10 cell. I sat on the edge of the thin mattress, the springs groaning in protest. I ran a trembling hand over the surface of George's photograph, now perched precariously on a flimsy, white particle board shelf. The first of many tears I would shed in this room fell then, silent and hot. They were tears not just of sadness, but of a profound, humiliating understanding. This was not a relocation. It was an erasure. I had been filed away, deemed obsolete, my history and my presence an inconvenience to the perfect, cold beauty of the house. The bars of the cage were no longer just felt. They were visible, closing in around me in this tiny, airless room. With my banishment to the small room, the unspoken rules of the house became law. I was now a resident ghost, permitted to exist as long as I made no sound, left no trace, and demanded no attention. The atmosphere shifted from one of cold neglect to active, daily hostility. The humiliations were no longer about my space, but about my very being. They became a structured part of my existence, an architecture of cruelty built one brick at a time. The house operated on a schedule of silent, ruthless efficiency, and my presence was the faulty gear, the squeaky wheel, the constant source of friction. I learned to navigate the mansion like a phantom, sticking to the edges of rooms, flinching at the sound of my own footsteps on the hard, polished floors. I timed my trips to the kitchen for times I knew Sarah would be out or occupied in her wing of the house. I would take a single banana or a yogurt, eating it quickly in my room, the door closed, as if I were a thief. Jason would return from the office, his shoulders tight with a weariness I recognized wasn't just from work, but from the immense, invisible pressure of maintaining his own success, his image, this entire flawless edifice. The moment he stepped through the door, the air would change, becoming charged with a tension that made my skin prickle. Every word he spoke to me then was sharp and cutting, designed to keep me at a distance, to remind me of my place. One evening, seeking a change from my four walls, I ventured into the living room. It was a vast, beautiful space with a two-story window overlooking the garden. It was also utterly unused, a stage set for a play that never happened. I settled into a large, white armchair that was as comfortable as a block of marble and opened a book. For a few minutes, I was lost in its pages. Then a tickle started in my throat, an innocent, physiological reaction. I tried to swallow it, to muffle it, but it grew until I let out a small, stifled cough. It was as if I had triggered a silent alarm. From his home office down the hall, a room I was never to enter, Jason's door flew open. "Mom," he barked, his face a mask of pure, unadulterated irritation. He was holding his phone, a sleek black slab that seemed to be an extension of his hand. "For God's sake, can't you keep quiet? I'm on an important conference call with Singapore. The app records everything, and your noise is disturbing the recording." I shrunk into the chair, my book trembling in my hands. I felt like a child caught in a mischievous, shameful act. "I'm sorry, Jason," I stammered, my face flushing with heat. "I didn't realize it was just a cough." "Just try to be more considerate," he snapped, his eyes sweeping over me as if I were a malfunctioning appliance. "Some of us are trying to work." He closed the door, the soft, definitive click of the latch sounding like a gunshot in the silent, cavernous room. I sat there, frozen, the words from my book a blur. As if my very existence, my natural, human sounds, were an obstacle to his success. I was no longer his mother. I was an acoustic problem to be managed, a nuisance to be silenced. The message was clear. My needs, my very bodily functions, were an intrusion upon his important world. The financial control was another carefully wielded weapon, one that stripped me of any last vestige of dignity. There was no allowance, no gentle, "Let me know if you need anything, Mom." The process was a ritual of humiliation. Every Friday evening, Jason would come home, hang his coat in the closet, and without a word of greeting directed at me, he would pull a few crisp bills from his wallet. He would then toss them onto the cold, hard surface of the kitchen island. They would land with a soft, rustling sound, sometimes slithering across the stone. "Take this for your necessities," he would say, his tone that of a landlord addressing. "Take this for your necessities," he would say, his tone that of a landlord addressing a tenant who was perpetually behind on rent. He would never meet my eyes during this transaction. "But remember," he would add, a cold finality in his voice, "you are a dependent living under my roof. My rules." The word dependent hung in the air between us, toxic and heavy. I, who had had a small, warm, trusting human being dependent on me for his every need, for food, for shelter, for love, for life itself, for the first 18 years of his life, was now a burden, a line item on his balance sheet. I used that money for my few personal items, toothpaste, a new handkerchief, sometimes a small, bittersweet bar of chocolate I would hide in my room like a guilty secret, a tiny, furtive rebellion against the austerity of my life. I felt a hot wave of shame every time I had to walk over, pick up those bills, and slip them into my pocket. It felt less like receiving support and more like accepting a payoff for my silence, for my compliance. Jason and Sarah, I came to realize, treated me worse than they treated the hired help. The housekeeper, Lupe, came twice a week. She had a defined role, set hours, and was paid a wage for her labor. She was spoken to with a modicum of professional respect. I, however, was unpaid labor, and only when my labor was deemed acceptable. If I dared to go into the kitchen, drawn by a lifetime of habit and a deep, soul-level need to nurture, to do, and try to cook something simple and comforting, a pot of lentil soup, a batch of oatmeal cookies, the kind Jason had loved as a boy, Sarah would materialize a silent, disapproving apparition. "Nana," she would say, her voice dripping with a faux concern that was infinitely more insulting than outright anger. "Your old methods are obsolete now. All that butter, that refined white flour. We can't afford to waste these organic, locally sourced ingredients." The chef has the weekly menu planned to the gram for optimal nutrition. She called him the chef. A man named Jean-Pierre, who came twice a week to prepare meals that were more about visual art and macronutrient ratios than sustenance or joy. My food, the food that had filled Jason's belly and built his bones, the food that was an expression of a mother's love, was now categorized as waste. So I retreated. My hands, which had kneaded dough and stirred stews for a hungry, growing boy, now lay idle in my lap, their purpose extinguished. And when I was sick, that was the deepest, most chilling betrayal. The calculus of my care was a cold, hard equation for my son, and my health was a variable that threatened to disrupt the solution. I remember one terrible winter, a vicious flu took hold of me and refused to let go. I lay shivering in my dark, airless room, my body a landscape of aches, my chest tight and rattling with each breath. Sarah brought me a bowl of broth once, wearing a surgical mask and vinyl gloves, placing the bowl carefully on the floor just inside my door, as if I were a plague victim. One night, the fever was particularly high, and I was gripped by a fit of coughing that felt like it would tear my ribs apart. I heard them arguing outside my room, their voices a low, sharp hiss in the hallway. "She needs a doctor, Jason. That cough sounds bronchial. It's been over a week. Do you have any idea what a house call from a specialist costs on a weekend? Or what an ER visit for a simple virus will run? It's probably just a bug. It'll pass. Why should I shell out hundreds, maybe thousands, for it to run its course?" Shell out. The term was so crude, so transactional. As if I were a leak in his financial boat, an unexpected expense he was reluctant to cover. I buried my face in my sweat-damp pillow, stifling the coughs that racked my frame, not wanting to give them more evidence of my costly existence. From that day on, I became an expert in hiding my aches and pains. A dizzy spell when I stood up too fast, a throbbing arthritic joint, a persistent, nagging pain in my side. I locked them all away, a secret, growing catalog of decay, so as not to burden my son's finances. My body became a traitor, not just to me, but to his bottom line. My worth was measured not in love or history, but in the dollars he didn't have to spend on my upkeep. In the profound, suffocating darkness of my existence in that house, there was a single, steadfast star. My granddaughter, Emily. She was 7 years old, a sprite with her father's intense dark eyes but her grandmother's soft, thoughtful soul. Emily was my sweet girl, my secret savior, the only person within those cold, polished walls who saw me not as a problem, a dependent, or a biohazard, but simply as Nana. Our relationship was a beautiful, clandestine operation. She would quietly slip into my small room when she knew her parents were distracted, her movements as silent and sure as a little spy. The click of my door opening was the sweetest sound I knew. She'd bring me treasures, a shiny rock from the garden, a feather, but most precious of all, the drawings she made at school. They were vibrant, chaotic explosions of color and life, scenes of a smiling, lopsided sun, a house with a crooked chimney and smoke curling from it, and always, always a small, stick-figure woman with a triangle of gray hair next to a taller girl, their stick-figure hands firmly entwined. "This is us, Nana," she'd whisper, her small, warm body snuggling up next to me on the narrow, unforgiving bed. She would infuse the sterile space with a sense of crayons, kid shampoo, and uncomplicated childhood. We're in a garden with giant flowers that reach the sky. I would hold her close, inhaling her essence, and for those few, stolen moments, the walls of my room would dissolve. The hum of the utility room would fade, and we would be transported to that impossible, beautiful garden. We would talk. She'd tell me about her friends, her teacher, the book they were reading. And I, in turn, would tell her stories. I would speak of a world she had never known, of a boy named Jason who was her father. I told her about the time he tried to give the family dog a bath in my good talcum powder, coating the poor animal and half the bathroom in sweet-smelling white dust. I described the frog he kept in his pocket for an entire day, proudly presenting it at the dinner table. I recounted, with a pang in my heart, his absolute, unwavering love for my apple pie, how he would hover in the kitchen, watching the golden crust form in the oven, begging for the first, too hot slice. She listened, her eyes wide and earnest, to these tales of a stranger who shared her name and his face. In her innocent love and her hunger for these stories, I found the will to keep going, to force myself out of bed each morning, to swallow my pride and pick up the money from the counter. She was the reason I maintained the facade of a functioning human being. For her, I would endure it all. She was the single, defiant flame that kept the cold of the mansion from turning my heart to ice. But in this house, even pure, unadulterated love was deemed a threat, a variable that could not be controlled. One afternoon, the world within my room was particularly bright. Emily was curled up against me, her head on my shoulder, and I was reading her The Velveteen Rabbit. We were lost in the tale of becoming real, a concept that felt painfully poignant to me. Our heads were close together, a unit of two generations bound by story and affection. The door swung open without a knock. Jason stood there, his silhouette filling the doorway, his face dark with an emotion I couldn't quite place. Anger, yes, but also something that looked like fear. "Emily, what have I told you?" he scolded, his voice harsh and loud in our quiet sanctuary. Emily flinched as if struck, scrambling away from me so quickly she almost fell off the bed. The book tumbled to the floor. "But, Daddy," Nana was reading to me. "It's about a rabbit." "I don't care what it's about," he interrupted, his eyes cutting from her frightened face to mine, full of cold accusation. "Grandma is old, Emily. Her immune system is weak. She's prone to germs. You need to keep your distance, do you understand me? Or you might get sick. It's not safe. Now, go to your room. Immediately." "Prone to germs." The words hung in the air, vile and dehumanizing. I was not a person to be loved. I was a collection of pathogens, a biohazard to be managed. The look of confused hurt on Emily's face, the way her little shoulders slumped in obedience and shame as she shuffled past her father without a backward glance, broke something fundamental inside me. The pieces of my heart, already cracked and fragile from 1,000 previous indignities, shattered completely that day. The greatest cruelty was not just the isolation, but the fact that the love I received, the only love I had, was now officially declared a danger to the object of that love. I was quarantined, not just physically, but emotionally. The last bridge connecting me to the family had been burned, and from the other side, my son had thrown the match. The greatest and most insidious cruelty, however, the one that inflicted the most lasting damage upon my spirit, was the elaborate lie I was forced to participate in. Even knowing the truth about my son, witnessing his coldness, feeling his contempt, I kept making excuses for him. It is a mother's last, desperate defense mechanism, a final, failing fortress against a truth too terrible to bear. To admit that your child is capable of such calculated cruelty is to admit a fundamental failure in the universe, in the very nature of love itself. This charade played out whenever we had visitors. Whenever my sister, Margaret, or one of George's old cousins would come for a rare visit, a miraculous, sickening transformation would occur. Jason would become the doting, devoted son. He'd greet me with a wide smile, put a solicitous arm around my shoulders, call me Mom in a warm, resonant voice that sounded nothing like his usual tone. He would help me into my chair at the dining table as if I were made of porcelain. He would regale our guests with stories of his business triumphs, and always, without fail, he would turn to me, his eyes shining with manufactured pride, and say, "And of course, I couldn't have done any of it without my mom's support. She's the real hero. We're so lucky to have her here with us." And I would have to sit there and smile, a stiff, painful stretching of the lips. I would have to nod and pat his hand and pretend that the arm around my shoulder didn't feel like a leaden weight, that the hand on mine didn't make my skin crawl. I would have to laugh at his jokes and participate in this elaborate, soul-destroying pantomime. "Oh, Jason, you're too kind," I'd murmur, the words like ash in my mouth. I hid my humiliation, my deep, abiding shame, behind a mask of maternal pride, all so that my son's reputation, his precious image as a successful family man, would not be damaged. I was an accomplice in my own erasure, polishing the bars of my own cage. After they left, the mask would drop instantly. The warmth would vanish from his eyes, replaced by the familiar coldness. The house would return to its tense silence, and I would retreat to my room, feeling more soiled and complicit than if I had committed a real crime. I would look at George's picture on the flimsy shelf and whisper, my voice cracking, "I'm sorry, George. I'm so sorry. I don't know what we did. I don't know who he has become." And in the deepest, darkest hours of the night, when the silence of the house was absolute and the darkness of my room was complete, I would clutch my last, tattered excuse. I would reassure myself, the mantra a worn-out prayer in the void. No, my son is not bad. He is not a bad man. He is just overworked. The pressure of his job is immense. It's changing him. He is providing this grand house, isn't he? He puts a roof over my head. He is just stressed. This isn't the real Jason. This was my final thread, the fraying rope I clung to as I dangled over the abyss of tea. The truth. To let go of it would be to fall into a despair from which there was no return. Today, the charade has become too heavy to bear. The weight of the lies, the accumulated weight of 1,000 humiliations, has finally surpassed my strength to carry it. Jason has left for work, off to another day of important calls and decisive meetings in his world of abstractions and profits. Sarah has gone shopping, likely to procure more organic, artfully arranged sustenance that I will eat alone in my room. Emily has gone to school, to a world of learning and laughter and social intricacies far from this silent, sterile museum. The house is empty, save for me and the ghost of the boy Jason was, the ghost of the woman I used to be, and the looming ghost of the future that awaits me. I am sitting on these stairs, the same steps where a lifetime ago, a little boy named Jason took his first wobbling, triumphant steps into his mother's waiting arms. The marble is cold and unyielding against my thin bones, a stark contrast to the warm, worn wooden steps of our old home. My eyes are dry now. No more tears come. I have cried a river in this house, a torrent of grief and shame that has soaked into the very foundations, and it has left me parched, a desert of a woman. There is simply nothing left to cry. I trace the intricate, swirling pattern in the stone with a trembling, blue-veined finger. I follow the gray veins as they meander through the white, a map of a cold, beautiful, and unforgiving land. I wasn't hungry for money. I was bursting with pride at his success. I only ever wanted love, a little respect, and simple kindness. The basic kindness one shows to a stranger, let alone the woman who carried you for 9 months, who rocked you through fevers, who sold her dreams so you could have yours. But my son gave me the mansion. He gave me the money tossed on the counter. In doing so, he took away the most precious things I possessed, my dignity, my autonomy, and the sacred, hard-won right to my own motherhood. He reduced me to a problem to be solved, a cost to be managed, a memory to be stored away in a dark room. He took the greatest role of my life and made it a footnote in the story of his. I think of Emily, of the drawing of us in the giant garden, now hidden beneath my mattress. I think of the fear in her eyes when her father scolded her for being near me. I cannot be the reason she learns to be afraid of love, of connection, of age. My presence here is a poison to her pure heart, just as it is a burden to her father's ledger. The last service I can render my family is to remove the problem. Now I sit here, the weight of my 78 years a heavier burden than any physical object I have ever carried. It is a weight of memories, of lost love, of broken promises. I am waiting. I am not waiting for an apology, for a miracle, for a change of heart. That ship has long since sailed, its wake grown cold on a distant sea. I am waiting for the day when the Lord, in his infinite mercy, calls me home. I am waiting for the final silence, the one that promises a peace this world could never give me, a peace beyond understanding, beyond marble and money, beyond the coldness in a son's eyes. so that my weariness and my son's endless, all-justifying stress can finally, blessedly, come to an end. And in that final moment, as I feel the last vestige of my strength ebb away here on these cold steps, I will close my eyes. I will not think of the successful executive, the cold husband, the distant father. I will not remember the tossed cash, the scolding words, the closed door. I will reach back, through the decades, through the pain, to the pure, unspoiled core of our story. I will feel, one last time, the ghost of a small, trusting hand in mine. I will hear his triumphant squeal of joy. I will see the sunlight of a long-ago afternoon illuminating the dust motes in our small, warm, loving home. And I will remember the steps, not as a place of an ending, but as a beginning, when the world was full of nothing but promise and my boy was still my boy.